all power is essentially seized with a degree of force. I think force is required, whether that's intellectual force, that's one method, or there are other kinds of force which I'm not necessarily advocating for, but they do happen across the continent.
Yeah.
I certainly don't think that, for example, I don't think Traore, he didn't get there because people essentially wanted him to be in that position, the powers that be, that is. So I think definitely young people, we need to learn to not demonize being forceful with our ideas. I think it's a good thing. Just look at Raila passed on. He was demonized for a lot of his life, but the force of his ideas and what he believed in, led to like some massive, I've not seen someone celebrated that long in the context of Kenya. So I think young people need to, what's amazing about Gen Zs and also millennials is that we love ideas, we own them, but now we need to do that in public spaces like the one that we're in right now.
Hey there, and welcome to Fanya Mambo Africa. Super excited today. I'm hosting a young man who's I think he's an assistant pastor, an actor, businessman, published author, and a pan-Africanist strategist, right?
That's
I got
true.
that right.
That's true, but some of your viewers might know me also as an actor.
Yeah.
So I acted on a couple of shows. And other than that, I'm also a scholar, a governance scholar. So I'm excited to be here with you, Sarah.
Karibu sana Alfa House.
Thank you.
And that is Andrew Levi.
Yeah, that's right.
Nice. So where have you been? A lot of Kenyans saw you when you were on screen at some point. Then I think you disappeared for a while.
Yeah.
Or just went to act on other spaces that we don't know about.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe you can start there.
Yeah, I think I'll give you a quick backstory. So my backstory is I'm actually a governance scholar. I did an undergrad degree related to, trying to solve corruption issues in Africa and around the world. I worked on a couple of big investigations. I think you remember the collapse of Lehman Brothers and a few of these massive frauds. So I did that in England, and I also did a couple of degrees after that, Oxford, Cambridge, etc. When I came back to Kenya, I worked in consulting, so with the likes of PwC, governance team for investigation, and the likes of McKinsey and other places. I took a break to act, not because I necessarily wanted to act, but because at the time I was bereaved. I lost my dad and we were very close. So I needed a year to just, kind of find myself. And I did that through, releasing, art is therapeutic. So then I was acting. I acted on a show called Becky in Citizen TV, and then on Shanga, which is somewhere on DSTV, and a movie called Sketchy Africans as well. Having done that and kind of, recovered from that period, I'm back in the strategy / governance consulting space.
All right. That's interesting. That's a very deep profile. And today our conversation is centered around African conversations, which is basically pan-Africanism. And out of curiosity, where did your interest for pan-Africanism content start about, or what drew you to pan-Africanism?
That's a great question, Sarah. I think for me, I've always identified as Pan-African. I say this because I was born in Zambia, in Lusaka. And I don't know, maybe it was a coincidence, but the hospital where I was born, I actually have a twin sister. So the hospital where we were born, I am told that the surgeon who pulled us out of the C-sec was actually the son of the then president, President Kaunda. So I can say for the longest time, I've been curious what's happening in governance spaces and, in Zambia and around Africa as well. Subsequent to that, I've lived in Kenya, I've been to Uganda, I've been in Rwanda, and even throughout my travels, a lot of my closest brothers and friends, they were Ghanaian, they were Nigerian, they were South African. So from that sense, I've always identified as African. I think we need to solve our problems at that scale as Africans, because if you look around the world, though there are countries, but Europe operates as a bloc.
Yeah.
And America is big enough to be a bloc and pulls in Canada as well. And I think Africa, that's where we have a very disjointed approach to handling problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now that you're well traveled across Africa, what do you think stands out about these different nations that you've been up to, and how best can we utilize that for, the unity that Africa ought to have?
Yeah, I think the most beautiful thing about Africa is that we are probably the most diverse continent that there is, in the sense that, if you think about it, I think there are over 100 plus ethnicities in Nigeria. Here in Kenya we have 44 or something like that. Yeah, if you think about it, that diversity can be something we tap into, because a lot of these different cultures have certain skill sets and strengths that we should leverage. I think, for example, if you look at Rwanda, they have mastered the capacity for reinvention. Essentially, they're doing, today in Kenya, we're talking about the Singapore story. I think the real Singapore story in Africa is Rwanda. They've gone from being very, very backward, just like Singapore was, and now, they've made leaps ahead. It's not a perfect story, but I think that's where, if you want aspects of democracy, you can look maybe to Kenya and to other spaces, Ghana as well, very strong in democracy. If you want a hustle culture and ambition and drive, you really don't beat the Nigerians. Everywhere I've been to some top institutions, and wherever I was, there's always more than one Nigerian there as well. So I think that's something we can do, leveraging all our skills across the board, yeah.
Okay. And when you look at the leaders that sort of started Africa post-colonialism, do you have any that you look at and you feel had the dream for Africa? And if yes, at what point do you feel we missed it?
That's a great question. And I think I'm always hesitant to, I think we've had a strong man problem in Africa, where we try and associate one individual with all the positives and all the goods, and that happens across the world. And I think I'd be hesitant to do that. So I'd draw a bit from different people. So, for example, President Kenneth Kaunda, a very deeply well-read person. He had a philosophy of African humanism. That was his philosophy. And it was essentially about drawing out the best ideals from individuals within a country to improve the country. I think I draw that from him. He was a peace-loving person as well. When I look at Rawlings of Ghana, I think he was. I need to make sure my language is clean.
No, just even the shooting is okay.
He was a guy who could, get ish done. He was someone who was actually very proactive, similar to Kagame as well. I think Kagame is someone who's extremely visionary, and that's something we could tap into. Mandela as well. I think he had a moral fortitude, which, in my view, has inspired the whole world. The reason why it combined is because no single person's philosophy was perfect. If you look at Mandela, yes, he forgave, but to some extent it came at the expense of many other Africans. Yeah. They were not ready yet. They hadn't reached that point. And he'd had 27 years in Robben Island to get through those emotions. Other South Africans probably woke up, and in one day they're being asked to forgive. And I think to that extent, there are so many positives you can draw from various individuals. Right here at home, Moi, I didn't live through his entire period here, but I think he had an emphasis on education, which was like a building block for what Kibaki then did and others did. So I think to that extent, if we can try and draw the best lessons from various individuals, various leaders, I think that would be beneficial to us.
Oh, that's interesting. When you look at it, you've mentioned leaders who've been there and some have rested, of course. In terms of how they operated and what we define democracy is, how do you feel that democracy has affected Africa, so to say, to not, I won't say not propel, but somehow not getting to where we have always dreamed of,
Okay, that's a good question. Have you ever gone fishing before?
Well, I don't think so. That is not fishing. That is just...
There's this saying, that about trying to catch an eel. Eels are electric and they're very slippery. So like trying to catch an eel with your hands is like trying to pin down what democracy is. I think democracy means many different things in different spaces. And even the version of democracy that's in America is clearly not perfect. And if you look at the UK right now, where I left, you can see that the citizens, the whole Brexit is like it's a blowback, given the poor state of democracy there. So I think in the context of Africa, I think that we haven't yet defined what democracy clearly looks like for us. And I think even if you look at our constitution, we put it there as a concept, democracy, but we haven't really understood who is considered. So democracy, the actual definition, comes from two words, demos, kratos. Demos being the people or the population, and kratos meaning power. So essentially power to the people.
Yeah.
We have not defined who these people are. Because if we did, we'd say that the people in the countryside, those people, about 30% of Kenya is what's arable, and it's essentially what we use. The majority of Kenya is arid and semi-arid. In those regions, in those parts of Kenya, I think those individuals are highly neglected and they are powerless. So when you talk about democracy, if they are powerless, then what kind of democracy have we actually created? I think we're creating a democracy for the few and not for the many. And I think that's a major challenge. Although I will say that democracy also is a journey. And I'd say, I think Raila Odinga, former prime minister who rested, I think he made attempts at trying to move the needle of democracy forward. Imperfectly, though. And I think that that's something that should continue to be done by younger generations like ourselves and those who are still in the political domain.
That's an interesting perspective. I would want to, from your perspective, what would be the ideal democracy, say, for, maybe Africa is pushing it, for Kenya? Yeah,
so I think, so I had a chance to I actually worked on some of the BBI stuff behind the scenes as a technical advisor. And I'll say this to Kenyans specifically, it's a bit of a shame or a travesty that we read the finance bill, ahead of the protests. I was out on the street, people read it. But many people didn't read the BBI report, and some people haven't read the Constitution. I think if we read it, we'd be clear about some of the ideas out there. One of the things that's been proposed is almost like the Swiss system, where you have these small convenings in the countryside, many of them. And in these convenings, you have maybe groups of 100 people discussing the issues. So devolved at that level, and then their decisions percolate upwards all the way to the center. And I think that kind of decentralized version of democracy is something that we should aspire to, partly because in Africa, we are so social and we're so oral. Like here, you and I, we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
Our thoughts, our recommendations should percolate somewhere, towards the decision makers, not just stay on a podcast like this. And I think that would probably be beneficial in my view.
It's interesting because culturally, Africans were storytellers.
Yeah.
And that is why they say a lot of the African knowledge, or even the Kenyan one, was erased because all they did was tell stories and not put it in writing.
Yeah.
I think it's helping that we have technology nowadays. We can tell stories, but documenting on video and audio formats, that's quite something.
Sure.
So you were very, of course, there are people who look at President Kagame of Rwanda and think he's a dictator.
Yeah.
Which is what democracy is for Rwanda, because I kind of feel like democracy is defined by the people who use it at that point, depending on how it benefits them. And we saw just the other day the Rwandan president, the DRC Congo president, the Kenyan president, the Angolan president, I don't know, and who else, were all in the United States, summoned by...
Summoned is the right word, yes.
It is the right word,
yeah.
The man who's the president of the US, President Trump.
Yeah.
And openly, he actually said, we are going to send machines there and we will get resources from there.
Yeah.
We will have money and everyone will go home happy. When you look at that and your imagination of what Africa should be, how does that make you feel?
I think two things. So Trump, as a businessman, he's exceptional.
Yeah.
As a strong negotiator, he always gets the upper hand. So kudos to him for what the deal he's managed to make, and also for, I guess, some of the American people. But for us, it's a sad time. One, we go into these conversations with the worst end of the bargain. Two, again, talk about democracy. Who was consulted? I mean, as they were summoned there, did they tell us, by the way, did President Ruto say, by the Kenyans, I'm going here? What would you like me to say? And what does success look like? What should I leave America with? What should our role be in stabilizing the region? Because we're a very powerful player in this space. And I think that's very, very tragic. I think it's not a political deal. I don't think it's not a democratic deal. I think it's purely a commercial deal that's in the interest of Americans and, sadly, in the interest of a few powerful people who will benefit. I'm sure the presidents will, at least some of them will personally benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not even, I think we only guess, but we know it is the truth.
Yeah.
But then how can we as Africa then change this conversation such that when we get to these rooms, we're negotiating as the bigger stakeholders, because we are the ones who own the minerals.
Yeah.
We own the land. We own these resources.
I think, first of all, I think I'll answer that question in a different way. Not so much how can we be prepared for when we get to those rooms, but asking ourselves, who is it who gets to walk into those rooms? Because a lot of these individuals, and this is going to be very controversial, but my reading of some of these African presidents is that they are stuck in a colonial mindset.
Yeah.
Some of them are wowed by literally white pigmentation. Some of them don't know what to say when they see, I'm not trying to be racist here, I'm just saying, when they see a white person, the mind takes a flight. Or when they are welcomed in a red carpet, or they walk into, the Oval Office. I think that people who go there should have that intellectual fortitude and the calmness, the right demeanor to be able to have very, very sound discussions. So that takes us back to the democratic point in who runs for office. I think, for example, if you were in the room, Sarah, you're very exposed, you've met many people, you're issue-oriented. I think a lot of these people are so wild that they start to think in very personal, selfish terms. So I think things will change when we have better people walk into the rooms. And if it's not like a better president, then having a president who chooses the right people to walk into those rooms on her or his behalf.
Okay. The other thing that baffles me is that this war has been going on since 1994 when the Rwandan genocide happened.
Yeah.
So since then, the DRC conflict has been on. Africa has tried to negotiate for peace, but we have not achieved. Why are we convinced, when we well know that Trump is a businessman with business interests, will resolve this conflict? Yet we have organizations across Africa. We have the African Union and all these other bodies that are supposed to get these leaders to, a place where there is peace and we can do business as a continent.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, it's tragic that we've been fighting for so long. In fact, we've been fighting for that's Congo specifically. They've been fighting for the entire lifespan of many Gen Zs. Yeah. They've been at war. I think that this is going to sound a bit philosophical, but in Africa, I think sometimes we're a bit lazy. Just like I said, we didn't define democracy for ourselves. Mm-hmm. We also haven't defined what peace looks like. And what peace looks like in a diverse context. So, for example, peace could be simply laying down arms, and that's something that we need to, so like the AU should decide, okay, what does peace look like? Does it look like laying down arms, or does it look like improving what's called beneficiation? So all these communities that are around that space are reaping the rewards of those minerals. Maybe that's what peace might look like. Yeah. But whatever is the case, Trump is very clear in particular about what peace looks like for him. Our challenge in Africa is that we've never really been clear. We're simply trying to, I'm not really sure. We're trying to kick the can down the road, I think. And I think essentially a lot of presidents are like, if I finish my term, I'll leave someone else to hold that baby called Congo, and then continue. But we haven't really met people who really want to sit down, have those hard conversations, and think through the right solutions to those problems.
So, because the bigger population in Africa, they say the mean age is 19, 20. What role then do the youth play? Because you see, as you're saying, they are passed on to generations. But then we are the young generation at this moment. What is our role? Like, what can we contribute towards that? And it's not just in Congo. It's basically for even leadership across Africa.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful question. And I think, let me first start with a challenge. One of the challenges I think, what I think is that as young people, first we need to engage more across borders. So I have friends from Congo, but these are friends who I met, say, at Oxford.
Yeah.
So that's how we convene. But the question is, what's my engagement with the everyday young person in Congo? I think there should be more flow of communication, sharing of ideas, understanding why did Kenya have the protests that we took part in vis-a-vis, Tanzania vis-a-vis Congo. Having those conversations, I think a challenge around that is, obviously there's sometimes a language barrier. And I think we are part of the generation that's so exposed. If we wanted, we could break those language barriers. There are tools to do that. And I definitely think that social media should be a mechanism by which we can agree on what standards across the board we want for our countries. And I think to the extent that we can inspire across country borders about standards of democracy, I think then we can tell the Congolese youth, think carefully about voting for this person, because we can see that this person is manipulating you or using you for these purposes. So I think improving our communication flow, our frequency, and our discussion of issues amongst youth at a continental level is extremely important. And I think that the AU, though it has like a youth body, I don't think it's in their interest to help the conversations flow, because the representation of the AU is mostly older people.
Yeah. How do we break that barrier? Because you see, these older people, unfortunately, the way nature works, mostly, if you're old, chances are you have fewer years to live. Young people, if everything, holding all factors constant, have a longer lifespan awaiting ahead. So how then do we break that barrier so that we're not having old people making decisions for us, yet maybe they have like 10, 15, 20 years to live, and we have like 40, 50, 60 years ahead of us. So we end up suffering for the next 40, 50, 60 years because of a decision that was made by someone who was exiting in 10 or 15.
You're so right. I mean, the challenge we face is like an asymmetry. There's an asymmetry of power. Older people have a lot more power, but there's also an asymmetry in time. I think because they don't have much time, they have a sense of urgency that we don't have. We had briefly, say in 2024, but I think for some reason that petered out in the context of Kenya and even in Nigeria as well. So I really think that, to be frank with you, how we can harness these relationships across the border. Social media is one channel, but the other is, to be honest, travel and exposure. It's like young people, for those who are able to, go across the border. For example, I went to Rwanda. I only went with my ID. I had a passport, but I never used it. They said you only need an ID, so I tested it. There are buses that go from Kenya to Rwanda, to Burundi. Over here in Kenya, we have a lot of our Burundi brothers and sisters and Rwandese and others who are in this context. And that exposes them. So when they go back to their countries, they can say, have you seen the expressway? Have you seen how parliament works in the context of Kenya? And I think if we do that, if we spend more time in our neighboring countries, I think that's actually going to put us in a stronger position to have meaningful conversations around improving Africa. And the thing is, even though these older people are in power, the law of attrition means that in the next 15, 20 years, all things held constant, we will be in those positions of power. And I think what would be tragic is if we get into those positions of power and we're not exposed. We've never been to Rwanda. We've never been to Congo. We should do a lot more of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, because exposure gives you a lot of knowledge. That's true. When you look at it, Tanzania had elections just in the month of October, and the president was very unhappy with Kenya, so to say, and neighboring countries, because in her speech, she said that the people who went to cause the protests were from neighboring countries. Why is it then that, you see, if for instance, Tanzania has looked at Kenya and seen these guys had their protest, maybe they pushed for change, they may not have gotten to where they want, but they pushed something. So when the youth there try to push for the same, then they're being suppressed. So how do they beat that? And it's not that Tanzania, because Uganda is also going for an election in January. Kenya is going in 2027.
Yeah. So I think your question is how do young people overcome that resistance from the top?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I'm a bit of I'm a pragmatist, and I think that all power is essentially seized with a degree of force. I think force is required, whether that's intellectual force. That's one method. Or there are other kinds of force which I'm not necessarily advocating for, but they do happen across the continent.
Yeah.
I certainly don't think that, for example, I don't think Traore, he didn't get there because people essentially wanted him to be in that position, the powers that be, that is. So I think definitely young people, we need to learn to not demonize being forceful with our ideas. I think it's a good thing. Just look at Raila, who passed on. He was demonized for a lot of his life, but the force of his ideas and what he believed in, led to like some massive, I've not seen someone celebrated that long in the context of Kenya. So I think young people need to, what's amazing about Gen Zs and also millennials is that we love ideas, we own them, but now we need to do that in public spaces like the one that we're in right now. And I think that the more forceful we are, and given our numbers, I think that will force leaders to bring us to the table and to respect our views. I think in terms of inspiring other contexts, I think it was perfectly okay for Tanzanians to borrow a leaf out of the Kenyan playbook. There are also things we borrow from them. And to someone like Madam President Suluhu, the reality is that Kenyans, we may have our ills, it's true, to some extent. Maybe we're seen as a bit rough around the edges. But the fact is that we also export a lot of things to other countries. For example, we export ambition. If you go to Tanzania, you go to Uganda, we are some of the people who are the most ambitious in those contexts. And Ugandans and Tanzanians who come here have the opportunity to pursue their dreams to a very great extent. So I think there are positives. So she shouldn't shut down Kenyans and neighbors for their negatives when they also want the positives that we offer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think they're willing to pick that part? I kind of feel like the older generation is always very selective in this we can pick, this we can't pick, because, it's going to change the status quo in some way.
Yeah, I think it's not a request. I think they must. I think they must make space, and they must consider both the merits and the demerits that neighboring countries and the young people offer, even in their countries. I think one of the major challenges is that we keep having, we have very civilized discussions with our oppressors, and that never works. Before, I never had dreads, but I grew my dreads partly in protest of the nonsense that's going on. I was hearkening back to what the Mao guys did, and they didn't beg to get space. And I think that that's something that we should never do. Even those who've gone before us, the leaders of Kenya, even the independence period, they didn't go begging when they went to the Let's Go and they went to these other spaces. They demanded space, and I think we just have to do that as young people in this continent.
All right. And I think young people have been doing so, because you've seen protests in Kenya, you've seen in Tanzania, you've seen in Mozambique, Morocco, and it goes on and on.
True, yeah.
When you look at these protests and how they are being handled.
Yeah.
And how the youth really have not managed to cross that, the line where, as you say, do not allow yourself to be suppressed. What do you think is going to be like the next step? Because protests have been done. So what's going to be like the next step?
So Sarah, I said in another iteration or another incarnation of my life, I was and I am back to being a strategy consultant. And I think one of the areas when I analyze the protests in Kenya, as well as in many other countries, is that we had the physical force, but we didn't bring the intellectual force. And I think so what you need in a protest is you need the physical force, you need the intellectual force, and you need the moral force. Now, we had the moral argument, we had the physical ground. But intellectually, when young people ask, so what's your plan, what's your agenda? We don't have one. And that should never be the case. I think that we should have paired strategy with the tactics that we had on the ground. And I think that, for example, there are good things to draw from these leaders. Their sense of organization, their institutionalization of structures. I think that that's something that if young people right now started to organize themselves saying, okay, I'm not saying this, but if we were holding a protest, we said, okay, this is our protest. This is what success looks like. And if we achieve this success, these will be the structures that we'll put in place, and so will be in this position, and so will do this. And this is how we'll divvy up the responsibilities. I think that's been absent. There is definitely a place for organic protests, but there's also huge importance in also being extremely structured and deliberate as well. Yeah.
When you watch some of the speeches by the leaders who started the Organization of African Union back in the 60s, there was a lot of talk about organization. So, because I think they learned, as you're saying, from Mau Mau and other Maji, whatever forces, that for you to achieve, if you go to fight alone, obviously they'll shoot you. But if you're organized, it's easier. Are we ready enough for that? Because today, when you look at the young people who step up and want to get into leadership, then there's the cancel culture coming up. And some people look at it, no, you just want to be in power so you can make money, or you have a scandal, or you did this. How do we shift that? Because it's a mind affair, I think.
Yeah. I think if you're going for leadership, you should always be ready to embrace opposition. That's going to be the case, whether you're a good leader or a bad leader. So being cancelled, that should just be something that you accept. That's probably inevitable if you're going to be a leader. If you're not being cancelled by Kenyans, I think if someone's successful enough in Africa, they'll be cancelled by the West. So
obviously,
so you have to embrace that. But I think also, I think if we increase our numbers of those of us who are running for office or running for some political leadership, then you have a higher probability of finding some of those good gems, ethical people, smart people, moral people, and persuasive people who can make meaningful change and lead people towards that change. I think the problem is we had too few, and that's always a risk. When you have very few stars who are shining, then you have a situation where the risk is very high. You ask yourself, is this guy trying to game us or not? Is this lady just trying to steal some cash or, get ahead? But if you have many people who are running for this, then you almost even lower the amount of gain or self-interest that can be in a situation. Because if not this young person, then another young person. So in the context of Kenya, I'm not saying they are youth, but just as an example, you have Edwin Sifuna, you have Babu Wino and say Ndindi Nyoro, right? If there was just one of them, then the stakes are very high. And you're saying, okay, if we trust Ndindi Nyoro, then he might be good or he might be bad.
Yeah.
But at least now you have these three, and then you have Caleb Hamisi, and then you have many others. I think essentially you reduce the stakes of the risk that's involved when you have more people at play. Yeah.
Okay. Across Africa, and you even gave an example of Traore, he's one person who everyone has been talking about. Of course, the West don't like him because he's a cool leader, but he's led his country for the last now 3 years. Yeah, 2022.
Yeah.
When you look at him and how he's running his country, and you compare that to our perceived Africa that is democratic, what are the lessons that young people are taking? Because it's the young people. He's young.
Yeah.
He's 37 now.
Wow. First of all, I think the West don't like him, not because he's a coup leader. I think that's a story. That's a farce. Because the West is known to facilitate many coups.
Yeah.
So they don't have a problem with coup leaders. They have a problem with leaders who are progressive, who are counter Western progress. Not that he's fighting Western progress, but he's pro-African progress.
Yeah.
And against Western extractivism. So I think that's why they have a problem with him. I think that in terms of the inspiration, I think we should definitely draw inspiration from him. And I also think that to some extent, So I'm trying to regain my train of thought. But yeah, I think that the problem with him is not that he's a coup leader, but that he's progressive. That's probably the main issue that we have at play there. The second thing I was going to say, though, is in terms of nation building, there's an important aspect that I've never heard Kenyans really speak about, much less Africans. So there's the hardware, there's the physical infrastructure and the development, but there's also a software side of development, which is actually around narrative. If you think about it, America is the power that it is today because of all the narratives that have been said, not for a very long time, since around 1945. Really, since the end of the Second World War, we've been saying every movie has an American hero, etc. They're always doing amazing things. But this is such an important part that when I was at Oxford, we had some individuals, some of my classmates were Singaporean, but we also had some experts from Singapore come and explain to us how they moved ahead. And one of the important pillars they mentioned was actually country branding and the narrative that they've created. So everything aligns with a particular narrative. And what I'm saying is that when you look at Traore, the impact he's having on his country is not just the physical infrastructure, which he's definitely building, but he's building step by step a very powerful narrative. You look at a lot of the diaspora, they want to move back. People want to invest. Africans, as well as some Europeans, particularly from Russia, they want to invest in that space now. So I think that what we can draw from him is not just that physical development that he's created, and I wouldn't necessarily advise, kind of doing a coup, but I definitely think that the work he's doing to build a very solid narrative is something that we should also draw inspiration from as young people and build that narrative, and not just leave it to politicians who, in my view, they have a poverty of imagination and a poverty of vision as well.
And in his narrative building, I think part of what was major for Africans to see is when he chased away all the France soldiers and closed the bases. When you look at the East Africa region, on the other hand, we're just expanding the bases of the Westerners. What lessons are there to draw? And for them, they knew very well these guys were here to extract minerals. Here in Kenya, gold was discovered in Kakamega, and we've already shot 3 people dead. So what lessons are we learning as Africa from him? I mean, especially the leadership.
There's something, I did this course called, Advanced Policy and Practice of Natural Resource Governance, and actually run by some guys in Switzerland. And if you understand the global economy, most extractive resources, the funding from there and the money from there finds its way to Switzerland, to Swiss banks. One of the first lessons they said is that when you find extractive resources, the first thing to do is actually stop, wait, and formulate a plan. That's actually where you're meant to start. in the context of Kenya, we have pronouncements instead that start the other way around. We will do X and Y. We will send this to so-and-so. We will sell this. There is a rule that not every extractive resource needs to be extracted.
Yeah.
Ever, and sometimes not at a certain time. You can wait until other infrastructures come in, whether it's security or it's other infrastructure that can help make meaningful returns from that extraction. So I think in Kenya and in Africa, that's been our challenge, that there isn't enough planning. Those who are involved in resource extraction, they either don't have the will or they don't have the knowledge to approach this with a level head. Just an example, I think it's Norway. It's one of the Scandinavian countries. But essentially, from their oil, they created the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. Oh. And this sovereign wealth fund is so wealthy, it runs into at least $1 trillion. But it's so wealthy that it's actually one of the major stakeholders in all the major companies, Tesla, Apple, as a country. Kenya, we talk about sovereign wealth fund, but what's the strategy? So they already pegged their oil on very meaningful companies elsewhere. So in as much as they are extracting value from their seas and their oil, etc., they're also at the same time extracting value from other countries. So the value that Americans are extracting. So if we are saying, okay, we are going to extract gold from Kakamega, but at the same time, when we sell it, we are investing in Tesla or Apple or other really strong companies, Safaricom, mostly outside, so that we are hedging the risk. So we take something from America, they take something from us.
Yeah. Wow. I see we have a gap in this country, and it's sad because we see it every day in the policies that are made. And I think as you said, we're very big on pronouncements without thinking through about it. And it's sad state of affairs, which I think we must keep talking so that even the people that are in power then start to see people actually understand the things you're supposed to be doing. So the other thing that is major, and this is also across with our leaders, is, like you say, once we make these pronouncements, then we find oil or refined gold, we just want to send people away immediately, But have we done a comparative check of even the markets? Because, fine, we have gold. Who are we selling to?
That's a really good point. I think I'm just going to use Singapore because people like using Singapore here, at least the leadership. Basically, what I'm trying to do is expose the level of thinking that went into Singapore. So Singapore, in their context, they didn't have many industries, to be honest. But what they did do is they provided an ecosystem and a good tax environment. And they said, okay, big banks around, because now it's one of the main banking hubs in the whole world. They said, you big banks, why don't you come? You set up, do whatever you need to do, okay? And we'll give you the tax incentives, okay? Now, in Kenya, that is what I think we should do in Africa. We shouldn't reinvent the wheel. If we don't have the full expertise to extract some of these things, we invite these people to come in. But what Singapore did, and many others do, is that once they come in, you impede the flight of capital. So yes, banks make your money, but your money doesn't leave Singapore. So in Kenya, that's what we should do. And in Africa, we should say, okay, fair enough, come extract gold as much as you want, really, as much oil as you want. You invest, you create the infrastructure and the systems and the processes. But once you do that, we will not only tax you, but we also ensure that your spending stays right here. And I think that's really, the world is an extractive world. That's not a bad thing. But what's wrong is when you don't have the protections to kind of stop you from kind of sinking to a great low. And that's what you see Trump is trying to do in America. He's inviting people to go to America to invest talent from around the world. At least that's what he was doing previously. But what he's doing is making sure that if you come to that country, then your best life is lived in America. Yeah.
Do you think Kenya, since this Singapore story now, I think everyone in Kenya knows we want to be like Singapore. From your experience with Singaporeans and what you see here, experience in Kenya, are we serious about our Singapore dream?
Definitely not. Definitely not. Because with Singapore, the number one investment they made was education. And I actually wrote about this in the newspaper. Basically, the most venerated career that you can have in Singapore is a teacher in Singapore. And it's not just the most venerated or celebrated, but it's also the one of the best paid careers. So it's right up there.
Teaching.
Yes, with doctor. And by the way, it's not just celebrated and well-paying. It's also one of the hardest to get into. So in Kenya, my experience is, unfortunately, I've seen that in Africa, teaching is sometimes a fallback for many people these days. In Singapore, it is an honor to be told, okay, you know what, you'd make a great electrical engineer, but you know what, given your talent, your ability, we'll hire you now to teach that generation. You'll be paid worth your salt for that. And given all the trappings that you require, as long as you reproduce people who are as smart as you, if not better. We have a president in Kenya, sorry to say this, but who says he's the smartest guy around? That's tragic. You should never want to be the smartest guy around. You should always want people around you who are smarter, who can show you other things. So if he's that smart, then as a leader, who's he reproduced to be smarter than him? And I think in Kenya, if we invested in education, like Singapore did, we'd have the finest of the, for example, for me, I went to very good institutions, but my passion has been teaching. So I've taught in various contexts, also a bit at Strathmore and etc. But my point is that if we invested more in that, I think a lot more people would be prepared to tackle the challenges that we face in this world. But at the moment, you think about the level of funding and the quality of individuals who sometimes get selected for those roles, it's tragic. And let me just give you a quick example. If you think about, for any CEO, what is the most important hire any CEO can have? It's a question. What's one of the most important hires that a CEO can make?
I do not want to answer that because I'm not sure, but I will personally, from what I look at it, it's someone who can teach others to do things.
This is the answer I'd give. Any CEO, one of the most critical hires is actually their secretary, male or female. The person who knows who will walk through the door, the person who understands what's going on. So what I'm trying to say is that the role may not be that significant, but if you don't have a very, very solid secretary who's helping you with your schedule, making all the things work together, then any CEO is essentially, their hands are tied behind their back, his or hers. And I think that's the situation in Kenya. You have great doctors and, great engineers, etc., and lawyers, but we are overlooking one of the most critical positions that you could ever have, who has the job of reproducing the talent in this country. And we should focus on it more.
Wow. I hope the president takes your advice seriously because it's very critical because, you can't speak big about Singapore and not do what they did. Also, merit is very critical for you to get to Singapore. That's my opinion, and it's very important. You've, of course, been part of the diaspora community for a while. When you look at it, what is the role of diaspora community in getting Africa to where we ought to be? Because we can't keep running away or doing a brain drain by sending people away. Then when we are there, we demand, Africa, you guys are not doing well. What's the role? And how do they plug in?
So the diaspora is such an essential part of the piece, of the governance piece, that, and then I'm going to depart from, people talk about brain drain and brain gain, but there's a third one that people don't usually talk about. And I think President Kibaki understood this. There's something called brain circulation. And what you want is brain circulation, meaning you don't impede the people who have talent from leaving for better opportunities. You should always support that. But then you find a way of keeping opportunities open for them to tap into so that the knowledge is circulating. And that's what happens in many other progressive economies. They allow that circulation. And I think in the context of the diaspora, they have the capital, they have some know-how, and they definitely have, one thing in the diaspora is they definitely have the conviction and the care for because you have to, because out there you're black, maybe you're mistreated, etc. So I think that we actually need to engage more and create platforms, whether it's like online platforms like this one or others, for us to engage more and see how we can expose them to the opportunities that they can tap into, not just with their money, but also with their skill set, and vice versa as well. Because there might be people in the diaspora who actually don't have a sense of the lay of the land. They don't know maybe there's an expert in gold mining out there, but doesn't know what's actually happening on the ground in Kakamega, and yet there should be clear channels. I saw that in the county of Kisumu. I don't know whether they did it, but I know they tried to have an international trade fair or something.
Yes.
And other countries have done that. I think that's a perfect opportunity. And I think members of the diaspora and locals should converge at such meetings. We have these conferences at KICC for international investors, but we don't have them at a local level, at a county level, for members of the diaspora specifically to come and see what's on the ground and where they can invest as well in various ways. Those are my thoughts.
Of course, diaspora contributes remittances in Kenya, very huge. But how then do we pull them into our governance, sort of? I don't know if that makes sense. Because obviously some it's because they're sending money to family, but either way, it ends up being in part of Kenya's economy. How then do we plug in, even in terms of opportunity? Because you see, you may be in diaspora and there's opportunity that can even help you invest either here or someone in here investing out there.
Yeah.
Or even the government of Kenya, because as you said, we can put our investments in Apple and institutions.
I think you're right. I think if I was any bank out there, and I think some have done it, I'd be creating many more diaspora-oriented investment vehicles that are legitimate and clean. I'd create that so that you're kind of pooling those resources. The other thing is, now if I was on the side of government, I would give special tax rebates to members of the diaspora. So if they're investing in Kenya or in Nigeria or in Ghana or in Uganda, I'd simply say, okay, because you're bringing money in, whatever you spend your money on, we'll essentially lop the tax off, or a significant amount. If you look, that's essentially what we're doing. Sorry to say this, but we subsidize the UN. Yeah. We subsidize so many other institutions here, and yet we don't want to subsidize our diaspora. What's the difference? They're living outside, like a lot of these UN people, and when they come back, they should be in a position to kind of extend their dollar or their pound extra miles, because of, a lower tax burden on them. That's the approach that I'd take.
Maybe they look at it like, you're Kenyans, you've made enough money, come back and, speaking of which, the United Nations is expanding their Nairobi office. I'm sure you must be aware. How do you think that will impact, of course, Kenya being the home country, but Africa at large?
Yeah.
Because it's of course, it's going to be like their center of operation, so to say.
Okay, I think on this, at one level, there's some. Okay, to be honest, I'm not too sure what the huge benefits are, because I think at scale, the UN doesn't actually employ that many people, especially locals. Yeah. It doesn't. So in terms of job creation, that's minimal. They also tend to have things, they rationalize salaries into, local versus international. If they wanted to do good by us, why don't they ramp up the local salaries? I mean, if you have a similar skill set, then a local person should be paid as much as an international person. And then through being paid better, then Sarah or Levi can, give better salaries to the people I hire at my farm or in other contexts. I think that's one way of, but I think one of the concerning issues is why has the UN moved here? And I don't know if many people are thinking about that, but the UN is kind of divesting from and moving away from places like New York and others because they are expensive.
Yeah.
So Trump's cuts and his policies and others and the general fiscal tightness in Europe has given the UN a lot less to work with financially. So they are not moving here to spend more. They are moving here to save. And so if you think about it, if their motivation was to save, then I don't see how they are coming here with a desire to essentially improve our ecosystem. But what I can say is, every such move has an opportunity. And I think the opportunity is to create satellite industries. So whether that's improving our tourism, local tourism, we should invest in that. Those who are going to create schools and, build them should also invest in that space to tap into that market, extract some of those resources. And then I also think that generally, we should just create some cottage industries that come out of the UN being, based here in a bigger way than it's been. Yeah.
Back to leadership, I would want, from how you look at it, how do you think colonialism has affected the way Africa is run today by the leaders? 65 years later, others 63.
Yeah. To be honest, it really saddens me to think about this. But I think that the cloud of colonialism hangs very heavy and looms very large over the entire continent. And I think that, sadly, I learned the other day that President Moi, and actually I think the current president, they went to, like a missionary-led, very colonially heavy and influenced school. I think it's Kapsabet or something like
Kapsabet boys.
Yeah, boys. That's good. That's well and good. But all I'm saying is that there was a lot of indoctrination at that time, and I think that hasn't really left the system of many individuals. And I think also what's worse is that this is going to be controversial, but I think one of our challenges is that a lot of our leadership comes from, how do I say it, have come from backgrounds of abject poverty. And this is going to be controversial, but sometimes when you come from such different and such difficult circumstances, all you want to do is create a better life for yourself. That makes sense. Yeah. And so some of these presidents, they've done just that. They've told us they sold eggs, they sold chickens, they did this, and they've made it now. But I think that there's a higher ceiling of ambition that we need. And I think that higher ceiling of ambition is more easily pursued by by individuals participating in politics who haven't always been worrying about the basic necessities. Yeah. But those who also are simply thinking, okay, we need to improve things as they are. We need gutters and drainage that works, stuff like that. I think that's one of the challenges. And I think when we have more people who are more exposed and less survivalist in positions of leadership, then we're probably likely to kind of free ourselves of those colonial shackles that we kind of experience right now.
Those shackles we seem to be watching as the Scramble for Africa 2.0 is happening today. So how are we going to get out of that? Because genuinely speaking, we are seeing it across. I mean, there is Trump in Congo, there is France in parts of West Africa. Yeah. There is British and America in Kenya.
Mm. Yeah, I think, like I said before, I'm a pragmatist, and I think the whole world is extractive. The whole world. Even Africans, we just pretend we're not, but we are. And I think instead of fighting it, I'm not someone who wants to swim against the tide. I believe in swimming with the tide sometimes. And what that means is that we should actually go out there to extract, but extract in our interest. So instead of shuddering and saying, oh my gosh, America's coming back in another form, Europe, China now, my question is, how exactly are we marshalling together to make the most of some of those economies, to get something out of China, to get something out of, like I said, even in the context of Kenya, if they are investing in the oil space or the gold space, but we also have massive shares in Apple and Uber, Trump will have a lot more respect.
Yeah,
you know, because the problem is nothing we do affects their pockets. And until we have something that can affect Trump's own pocket, you know, and some of those leaders and some of those rich people, I think that's when we'll get respect, because they're like, oh, if we make Kenya angry, they will pull out and we'll lose, you know, a significant proportion of the investments in our companies. And I think that's what I see the Emiratis doing in the UAE. They're highly invested in many of these firms out there, these tech firms. And so there's a sense in which they can't push them too far. Yeah.
How does Africa then, if we are to use that form of mentality, which is very good, how do we bring our African leaders together for that one vision? Because, I mean, if already Kenya does not have a vision, Uganda, you can't tell. How do you bring the 54 visions to one such that they look at it as a bloc that matters? It's about 1.3 billion people.
Yeah. You know, there's an economist, Adam Smith, ages ago. I'm not hopping on about Western thinking. You know, we have our great thinking here as well. But essentially, he said that we are all self-interested and self-motivated. I think to some extent that's true. And I think that we just need to find out what can we selfishly desire as each of us African countries that can spur us to move together in one direction. And I think what's common to almost all of us is the colonial baggage.
Yeah.
I mean, we found ourselves under the boot of some Western boot at some point. And I think to the extent that that should be what drives us. I think some of these other ideas that we have are nice to haves, but let's say like climate change. It's a nice to have, but it's not gonna make everybody across the continent move. But if we say no, we are demanding African respect and respect for people with black pigmentation, etc. I think that should unashamedly be our rallying call. Look at Trump. He doesn't hide it.
Yeah.
He's very pro-white. That's not wrong. He's very he's not just pro-American, but he's pro-white. So if you're an immigrant from a white country, you're pretty much welcome there.
Yeah.
But in Africa, we don't seem to take that pride in saying, okay, we have a huge force, we have a huge number. And if I don't know if you know these statistics, but right now, the most progressive immigrant group in all of America, progressive in terms of, you know, in economic terms, the Nigerians. So right now, if you're a Nigerian, it's almost like the system is rigged in your favor in America. What it means is that the doctors, the engineers, not because they're being helped, but because they're really smart and they've worked hard. If we had some way of enticing those huge numbers of Nigerians and Ghanaians and Kenyans all around the world in this selfish desire to move our continent forward and to kind of gain our respect globally, I think that's what would rally us together, not just those of us who are in this continent, but also those in the diaspora.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would work. But, you know, some joke that, I mean, if you're Nigerian, when you think about going back home, you're like, there's only one way out. I have to make it in this United States by fire, by force. Yeah. Which is also a good, it's ambition. Yes, and we have to keep pushing it. Oh, that's deep. I love it. As we come to the end, maybe what do you feel the African youth ought to have in their minds that is meant or that will spur this continent to the next level? Because we have a whole life ahead of us. What is that in common that we should all put in mind that will, you know, propel us to where we dream? Because we have ambitions. Everyone wants to be, you know, something.
Yeah. I think, first of all, to African youth, I want to say that, please, if you've been underestimating yourselves and your power, I want to tell you to quit today. Quit underestimating your power. I say this because America is known as a cultural force. It's American culture which actually gets the big bucks.
Yeah.
You know, from Hollywood to even Uber, we do things, we indulge in things because it's American, because they have a powerful culture. Today, those tables have turned. The most powerful cultural force in the world today is the African one. Everybody's looking to African music. Everybody's looking to African dance. Athletes, even if you look at some of the leaders, the UK conservative head is a woman of African extraction. President Obama was African extraction. Everywhere you go, Africans are starting to kind of appear in those spaces. So we're extremely powerful at a cultural level. And if you understand that it's culture that got America the level of respect and investments that they got, then you'd know that we're in a very strong position. So I think we should take a lot more pride as young people and actually put some demands behind our culture. So for example, the white people who come here to run next to our champions in E10, how much are they spending? I'm telling you, if it was me and you wanted to be, because we have the Olympic champions, if it was me, you would have to, your visa would probably cost almost 100,000 to run with our E10 champions. Yeah, it would cost a lot. To get access to our music, to get access to our artifacts, I think we should charge a lot, put a much higher premium on accessing that content for the rest of the world. And since culture is such a force around the world, I think we should stop underestimating ourselves. And in any event, it's only a matter of time before we will become an even bigger force. The question is that when we do become that bigger force, because we have the numbers behind us, we're the youngest continent, we have the most culturally profound continent. But the question is, when we get to that point, will it be meaningful, or will we not have thought about how to harness and keep all that attention and all the investments that we might be getting our way? So that's what I'd say to young people. Yeah, but please fight on. And if you're scared, reach out to people like me, and we'll be fighting alongside you. Yeah,
we gotta keep fighting. That's the spirit. I mean, a luta continua. We're never stopping this fight.
Just in full, that saying is, did you know that saying is a luta continua? And the next bit is Victoria asserta.
Victory is assured.
Yeah, victory is assured. And we should never forget, we don't just say the struggle continues, but it continues because we are sure and we're confident that we will overcome, and we must overcome some of the poor leadership that we have on the continent.
Wow, that's lovely. Hey, Levi, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
I didn't know you're that deep in matters, African and growth and what we desire to be. But it's beautiful to have conversations like you. That's why we have these platforms, because we have to keep enlightening each other and, putting Africans to where we ought to be. We know ourselves. And we love, and there's a future we envision, and we must live it in our lifetime. Absolutely.
And I just want to say thank you to you, Sarah, and this platform, the Alfa House. I think the work you're doing is incredible.
Thank you.
I think to the extent that it is possible, people should try and replicate and draw inspiration from the work that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Karibu sana. Yeah. Thank you very much. To you who's been watching, thank you very much. We are ending the year. Please do not end the year without subscribing. We will catch you on the next episodes. You done? You had a word?
Yeah, find me on Instagram, find me on YouTube. I have a podcast. And,
tell them what it is so they know where to subscribe.
Yeah. So my podcast is called 25 Force Podcast, 25 Force, because I've been talking about being forceful. And then on Instagram, find me, the real Andrew Levi, and happy to engage on strategy, on governance, and just kind of improving this content. It's worth it. This is the only lifetime we get. There will be no second takes. So let's do this together.
Let's do this. And as he said, a luta continua.
Victoria asserta.
Fantastic. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas.